She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed no more than 130 pounds, and had the kind of quiet confidence that people often mistook for weakness. Her name was Maya Reeves, and she had spent the last 11 years of her life training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and combat wrestling. Not for fame, not for money, but because she genuinely loved the discipline. She was a former military police officer who had served 2 tours overseas. She had come back home with nothing but a small apartment, a worn training bag, and an unbreakable mindset. She had been invited to a special joint training demonstration at a naval base in Virginia, an event where elite fighters come to exchange techniques. There were 282 Navy SEALs seated in the bleachers that afternoon, most of them big men with thick arms and thick opinions. Opinions about what a woman could and could not do in a real fight. Maya arrived early, stretched quietly in the corner. She said very little to anyone. She was used to being underestimated. She had been underestimated her whole life. In school, in the military, and certainly in every gym she had ever walked into. What she had learned was simple. Let people believe what they want to believe. The truth always shows itself eventually. She warmed up alone while the other demonstrators, mostly large male instructors, joked loudly near the center mat. 2 of them, Bryce and Callum, were the ones running the demonstration. Both former special operations, both over 6 feet, both with years of hand-to-hand combat experience. They had been told Maya would be their partner for the afternoon. They had looked at her once, laughed quietly between themselves, and went back to their conversation. Nobody warned them. Nobody felt the need to. The air in the room was thick with arrogance. The SEALs waited for a show they thought they understood. They saw a woman half their size and saw an easy afternoon. But Maya wasn't there to put on a show. She was there to demonstrate the reality of the discipline she had mastered. She walked to the center mat with the same quiet confidence. She didn't need to speak to be heard. In the military, they teach you to respect the weapon you see. They don't always teach you to respect the one you don't. Bryce stepped forward, thinking this was a formality, a joke to tell at the bar later that night. But the room had gone cold. The joking had stopped. Even Callum, standing back, felt a shift he couldn't explain. They had looked at her once and seen a girl. They should have looked twice. They should have looked at her eyes. Because the truth always shows itself eventually, and the truth was about to hit them hard. The demonstration began smoothly enough. In that cold, cavernous hall, the air was thick with the weight of expectation and the scent of old sweat. The first hour was structured. Bryce and Callum were in their element, masters of their craft, or so they believed. They showed takedown techniques, arm locks, and pressure point holds to the SEALs in the bleachers. The mechanics were flawless, the theory sound. The audience was engaged. They were professionals, men who respected the geometry of combat. They nodded along, processing the data. Maya watched from the side, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She wasn't just observing techniques, she was observing the men. She had been told she would be brought in for the second half, the neutralization demonstration. She was meant to be the example. The instructors wanted to show how a bigger fighter could easily handle a smaller, faster opponent. In their minds, she was already defeated. What nobody had asked her, not once during the briefing, was how much real-world experience she actually had. They had seen her name on a sheet of paper, seen her photo, and made their decision about her before she ever walked through the door. They looked at the stats, the weight, the height. They saw a variable they could control. They were confident in their math. When the second half began, Callum called her onto the mat with a casual wave of his hand, the kind of wave you give someone you expect to move. She walked out calmly. No bravado, no hesitation, just the steady movement of someone who knows exactly where they are. The bleachers went quiet for just a moment. 282 men taking in the sight of this small, calm woman stepping onto the mat. She stood between 2 men who each outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. To the observers, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. A few of them smiled, a few whispered. They were watching a demonstration, not a fight, or so they thought. Most of them settled back in their seats with the easy confidence of people who already knew how this story ended. They were wrong. But they didn't know that yet. They were about to learn that real-world experience isn't found on a sheet of paper. In the field, size is a factor, but speed and experience are the variables that change the equation. And Maya was a master of the variable. The air in the room changed. The casual atmosphere evaporated. replaced by the electric hum of impending violence. We see what we expect to see. We prepare for the threat we understand. We never prepare for the one we dismiss. They began to see it. The way she moved. The way she didn't waste a single breath. The story they thought they knew was shifting. The demonstration was over. The lesson had just begun. This is the story of the variable they forgot to account for. Stay sharp, never assume. The training mat is a place of discipline, but it can quickly become a theater of ego. This was supposed to be a routine exercise. The first exchange was meant to be controlled, a routine demonstration of a technique designed for efficiency. Callum was supposed to demonstrate a double leg sweep, a technique meant to take a smaller opponent off their feet quickly and cleanly. Maya was told to resist naturally, which she did. She was following the rules, playing the part of the trainee. But Callum pushed harder than the script called for. He wanted to make it look impressive. He wanted to dominate the room. He came in fast, grabbed low, and drove forward with his full body weight. This wasn't a demonstration anymore. Instead of a clean takedown, he hit her with a real tackle. She went sideways, her shoulder catching the mat with a sickening thud. Before she could even attempt to reset, Bryce stepped in from the other side. This was no longer just one man's ego. It was a setup. Off script, Bryce delivered 2 sharp double kicks to her midsection, driving her fully down to the floor. The air was gone. It wasn't a brutal attack, but it wasn't gentle either. It was the kind of thing that happens when men decide to make a point about power. The bleachers reacted with a low murmur. Not shock exactly, but something uncomfortable. The line had been crossed. A few seasoned SEALs shifted in their seats. They saw what was happening, even if the men on the mat didn't see the danger yet. Maya lay flat on the mat for 2 full seconds. 2 seconds that felt like an eternity in the cold, industrial silence. She was breathing. She was thinking. She was processing the betrayal and measuring the cost of their arrogance. She was deciding how this would end. From the outside, it probably looked like she was done. They couldn't have been more wrong. Callum was already turning back toward the audience, lifting one hand like a man who had just proved his superiority. Bryce straightened up, smoothing his shirt. Neither of them looked back at her. To them, she was already yesterday's news. That was their first real mistake. They assumed the fight was over because they had won the moment. But the war was just beginning. In this world, underestimating your opponent is a luxury you can't afford. They had handed her the most dangerous weapon of all: clarity. The air in the room shifted. The murmur died. Something was rising from that mat that no one had scripted. Maya wasn't just a trainee. She was the storm they hadn't bothered to check the weather for, and it was already here. Ego is a heavy weight to carry in a fight. It slows you down. It blinds you. Callum and Bryce were about to learn that the hard way. Stay tuned. She got up slowly, which was itself a kind of strategy. There is a difference between getting up because you are hurt and getting up because you are choosing your next move with care. Maya was doing the second thing. She rolled to her side, pressed one hand to the mat, and brought one knee up. Not dramatically, just steadily. She stood, not angrily, just with a presence that hadn't been there before. Her breathing was a rhythmic, controlled pulse against the silence. She looked at Bryce first, then at Callum, then at the mat between them. The SEALs in the bleachers had gone very quiet. Something in the air had shifted. That invisible thing that changes in a room when the story stops going the expected way. A senior SEAL recognized it immediately, a very private decision. Maya said nothing. She didn't need to. She moved back toward the center of the mat with an expression more focused than any they had seen. Callum laughed, short, dismissive. It was the kind of laugh people use to fill a space when they are not quite as comfortable as they are pretending to be. He waved her forward, but Bryce just watched. The room had gone cold. Maya took one breath, and then everything changed. The room didn't just go quiet, it went cold. The calculated patience of a predator had replaced the struggle of the student. The mat was hers now. Her movements were no longer reactive. They were surgical. Every inch she took was a piece of a larger puzzle Callum hadn't solved yet. This wasn't a sparring match anymore. It was an interrogation of spirit. The veterans in the room knew it. They were seeing a master at work. Callum's wave was meant to show dominance, but as she approached, his hand dropped. The space he tried to fill with laughter was closing fast. Under the industrial lights, the gym felt like a cathedral, a place where truths are revealed through sweat and bone. Maya was the truth. Maya wasn't looking for an opening, she was creating one. A private decision made on the floor was now becoming a very public lesson. Bryce uncrossed his arms. He could feel the gravity shifting toward her. The spectator had become a participant in the collective silence. Then, the first move. Not a strike, but a repositioning that forced Callum to turn. He was already losing ground before he even felt her. It's the moment the underdog stops being the underdog and starts being the lesson. Maya had become the hardest lesson in that room. The veterans didn't cheer. They watched with a quiet, heavy respect. They were witnessing something rare, the birth of a predator. She hadn't just stood up. She had transcended the expectation of failure. The mat, the room, the moment, it all belonged to her now. She was the definition of focus. Not anger, not fear, but a clarity that could cut through steel. The rise was complete. In the end, it's not about how hard you're hit. It's about the strategy of the rise, and Maya's rise was flawless. The story of the mat is the story of us all. When the world expects you to stay down, choose your next move with care. Stay steady. She moved first. In an environment where every millisecond counts, she didn't just react, she dictated the terms of the engagement, and she moved fast. Faster than either man expected from someone who had just been kicked to the floor. Bryce and Callum thought the fight was over. They were wrong. She closed the distance on Bryce in under 2 seconds. It wasn't just speed, it was predatory intent, honed through years of repetitive, grueling discipline. She ducked under his instinctive grab, her movement fluid, like water finding the path of least resistance. Bryce was already behind the curve. She got her right arm behind his left knee, drove her left shoulder into his thigh. The mechanics were perfect. Physics was now her primary weapon. She took him down with a clean single-leg takedown. There was so much force and technique behind it that he hit the mat with a thud that echoed through the entire facility. Before Bryce could even process the sudden shift in gravity, she was already in position. She wasn't just winning a fight, she was executing a sequence. Her body weight was distributed perfectly. Every inch of her frame was utilized to pin him. This is what a decade of mat time looks like. Her right knee pressed into the outside of his leg, her arms controlling his lower half with the kind of grip that takes years to develop. Total isolation. She had his right leg isolated in under 4 seconds. He tried to roll. She adjusted. He was a passenger in his own defeat. He tried to push her off with his left foot. She shifted her angle and increased the pressure. Not enough to break anything, but enough to end the debate. Every single person watching could see exactly what was happening. It was a masterclass in pressure. Bryce went still. He knew it was over. But there was still Callum. He moved toward her, sensing an opening, or perhaps just driven by an instinctive need to intervene. She saw him coming without looking directly at him, peripheral vision trained over a decade of sparring. She wasn't just fighting Bryce, she was tracking the room. She released Bryce just long enough to drop flat, let Callum's grab miss, and scramble behind him. It was a high-stakes gamble executed flawlessly. She took his back, wrapped her legs around his. The hooks were in. Callum was now the nail, and she was the hammer. She drove him into the mat, a controlled rear takedown that was so clean it looked choreographed. But in this room, there is no script. She moved first. She moved fast. And in the end, that was all that mattered. History belongs to those who act while others process. The sound in that building was something nobody who was there would easily forget. It was a visceral vibration. 282 Navy SEALs stood in the shadows, men who had seen the darkest corners of combat. Men who had parachuted into midnight voids and who had survived conditions that would break most spirits. These were men trained to expect the unexpected, yet they made a noise like a collective intake of breath. It wasn't just applause, it was the heavy mechanical sound of a large group of people recalibrating. Some stood up, their boots scraping against the concrete. Some laughed, not the mocking laugh from the start, but the honest kind, born from genuine, unsettling surprise. Others said nothing at all, eyes fixed forward, still processing the physical logic of what they had just witnessed. On the center mat, the hierarchy had shifted. Callum was face down, the air forced from his lungs. Maya's weight was a calculated anchor, controlling his hips. Her legs were entwined with his in a lockdown that neutralized his legendary strength. She held the position. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 full seconds, a lifetime in a fight, ensuring every man in that room saw the truth. Then, in one fluid, terrifyingly efficient motion, she released him and stood. Nearby, Bryce sat up slowly. His gaze was anchored to his own leg, checking for phantom damage, his expression one of pure, silent disbelief. The instructors hadn't been humiliated in the traditional sense, but they had been answered, clearly, physically, and without apology. That single answer had rewritten the story the afternoon had been telling, turning a lesson in dominance into a masterclass in evolution. The air in the room felt different now, because when the story changes, the people in it have to change too, and these men were just getting started. The air in the training facility was thick, charged with the heavy silence that follows a moment of absolute focus. The demonstration was over, but its energy remained. Commander Garrett Walsh, the senior coordinator who had organized the demonstration, walked onto the mat before anyone else. He was 53 years old, built from decades of discipline. He possessed the careful expression of someone who always thought before he spoke. A man who understood that in his world a single word could carry the weight of a life. He looked at Maya for a long, silent moment. In that silence, he wasn't just seeing her, he was measuring the depth of the composure she had just displayed. Then, he asked her one question. It wasn't about the fight or the strategy. He simply asked her how long she had been training. She told him 11 years. 11 years of repetitive, grueling work. A lifetime of preparation for a moment that had lasted only minutes. He nodded slowly, letting the number settle. He looked back at the bleachers, then toward the men who had been her opposition. Bryce and Callum were now standing, brushing the dust from their gear with the controlled expressions of men who were choosing dignity over defensiveness. Walsh stepped forward and shook Maya's hand. It was a firm handshake, the kind that means something in a community where actions always speak louder than words. He said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, that what she had just demonstrated was not just technique, it was something far more rare. It was composure under pressure, the ability to keep the mind clear when the body is screaming and the environment is collapsing around you. In his experience, that composure was harder to teach than any physical skill. You can build muscle, but you have to forge character. The bleachers responded again. This time it was different, measured, respectful. It was the kind of recognition that only comes from those who know the cost of excellence. Maya nodded once. She did not smile broadly or perform any kind of victory. She stood on the mat and accepted the acknowledgement quietly. She accepted it the way she had trained herself to accept everything in life, quietly and without excess. Discipline had become her second nature. In the world of elite operations, the loudest thing in the room is often the silence of a professional. Maya had mastered that silence. Under the watchful eye of Commander Walsh, a new standard had been set. It wasn't about the fight, it was about who she was after the fight was over. The demonstration was over, but the story of Maya's composure would ripple through the facility for years to come. A lesson in the power of restraint. True strength doesn't need to shout to be heard. It is seen in the steady hand, the calm breath, and the quiet acceptance of success. The facility returns to silence, but the mat remembers the weight of 11 years and the moment it all became worth it. Composure, discipline, excellence. These are the hallmarks of the professional, quietly and without excess. This has been the story of Commander Walsh's verdict. Training continues, silence remains. The demonstration had ended. The air in the facility was thick with the scent of sweat and floor mats. As the formal session dissolved, the expected silence didn't follow. Instead, something unexpected began to shift. The SEALs began to move. They didn't descend from the bleachers all at once. It was a steady, rhythmic approach. Groups of 2 and 3 drifted toward the center of the room, where Maya stood alone, gathering her gear. They didn't come with skepticism. They came with questions. Real, sharp questions. The kind of questions that fighters ask each other when they genuinely want to understand something. They asked about her entry angle on the single leg. They wanted the secrets of her leverage. Maya didn't perform. She simply answered. She spoke of distance control against heavier frames. She explained the precise distribution of weight during a rear takedown, her movements efficient and practiced. She used her hands, her body, and the willing frames of elite warriors to explain the mechanics in plain, unvarnished language. For nearly 40 minutes, the schedule was forgotten. The official roles were cast aside. On that mat, she wasn't just a guest, she was a teacher. Not because of a title, but because she had something real to offer. She taught men who lived and died by their ability to learn. Men who recognized the value of what she knew. Bryce and Callum remained. That was the detail that resonated. That was the part that mattered most. In their world, they could have walked away the moment the clock stopped. Nobody would have thought less of them, but they stayed. They stood in the circle, and they listened. They were students in that moment. Eventually, Callum stepped forward. He asked her to show him the exact grip she had locked onto his leg. Maya showed him. Her hands were steady, her instructions clear, stripping away the mystery of the move. He nodded, worked the detail, and felt the mechanic click into place. Then he thanked her. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of their training, a blink in a lifetime of combat. But between people who have just been honest with each other on a mat, small moments are never small. They are the foundations of respect. They are the moments that change everything. The mat remains. The lesson stays. Word travels fast. By next morning, the story of what happened on that mat was moving through hidden channels. Invitations followed, to connect, to lead. Maya's name was becoming a beacon for those seeking strength. But one message stood out. A young trainee wanted to know how she kept her composure after being knocked down. Maya's honest answer? She wasn't always calm. She spent years being angry at the low expectations. Her composure was built, painfully over time, forged in every no and every doubt she ever faced. She told the young woman everything. The story that matters is never just the single moment on the mat. It is the invisible work of years. The quiet refusal to stay down when the world expects it. We are not the moments we are knocked down. We are the years we spent learning how to stand back up.
6 months after that afternoon in Virginia, Commander Walsh included the demonstration in a training report on adaptive combat techniques and unconscious bias. He wrote that one of the most valuable lessons was the tendency of experienced fighters to underestimate an opponent based on appearance. He noted the serious tactical liability the tendency creates in real-world situations. He named no one, but the people in that room knew. Maya went back to her regular life. Nothing looked different from the outside, but something had settled in her. She had been fully seen. She trained the next morning at 5:30, same as always, teaching her Tuesday class, correcting grips, demonstrating footwork. She told her students that the most important thing they would ever develop was not speed or strength or even technique. It was the decision, made privately and repeatedly over time, to get back up, every single time, no matter who was watching.